Hi, my name's Joe. I run games, and the game that we're running today is Draw Steel. Draw Steel is, you know what that is. It's a tactical, cinematic, heroic fantasy game put out by MCBM. Today is campaign diary number 3 for my game titled A Study in Effluence. Effluence. Drippy stuff. So this is campaign diary number 3, though actually really kind of number 2, since the first one was backstory and character creation. It was good though, right? I liked it. I thought that was fun. Anyway, when last we left our heroes, they were here in Fort Sinum in southern Thessalon, just along the Rain Wall, the border between Thessalon and the Rainmar kingdoms to the south. There's a war going on, and so we don't like to cross the Rain Wall. Last session, the PCs found themselves at the Ciabatta farm. Ciabatta? Ciabatta. Ciabatta's a bread. Although, fun fact, same root word. They found themselves at the Ciabatta family farm, driving off Raider whites? Anyway, the point is, little rats raiding the grain stores. Who knew? They drove off the raiders and talked to them about how they had been driven from their warrens because their leaders kept showing up with no heads. And then coincidentally, on the way back into town, they encountered a woman with no head. And so now we know there be bread bettles in them thar woods. You want to know what happens this time? Let's start. Our PCs begin not at the rice farm, but back in town. We start in town. A local spice merchant named Marclette has a box that needs to go out to the Ciabatta farm, and she knows that the PCs have been going out there lately. She's like, hey, while you're on your way, take this box of stuff. It's Costa Fin shit, it's paprika, and these dried brown chilies, and some saffron, and, they haven't been into town, so the box has taken up space in my shop, and they're like, okay, fine, well, we're going back that way anyway, we'll drop off the box. But when they get to the farm, they discover that the place is kind of torn up, right? There's no animals around. There's big smushy footprints in the ground. A chunk of the barn looks like it has been taken out. And most importantly, the door has been blown out from the inside. The door to the house, where the people live. Obviously, the PCs spring into action, which means they roll dice. Vanish starts looking around for survivors outside and finds an unconscious and bleeding Kip off to the side by the mill. He manages to stabilize Kip, though he is not awake yet. Titus and Marta head inside the house, calling for survivors, while Corinne starts inspecting all this torn up, the barn, the mud, everything. Corinne discovers footprints. Big fuck-off footprints, not in a straight path. It looks to her eye like what has happened is something big came out of the house and then sort of careened into the barn and then sort of ran off down the trail through the rice paddies, leaving the occasional big footprint. So now she thinks it must have been encumbered. It must have been clumsy. Maybe it was running, and maybe it was carrying something heavy. Inside the house, we find a deeply distraught Yvette over the unconscious body of her father. Diego is in bad shape. She's sort of keeping his brow wet and cool, but she doesn't know what to do, and he's been this way for probably hours now. So immediately the PCs spring into action. They start making skill checks, they start doing stabilize actions, and they start doing what they can to help this guy out. They get him to the point where he is stable, but he's not conscious, and he's not mobile at the moment. He's twisted in some ways that bodies should not twist, and what they realize is this guy needs a healer, and we don't have one. Okay, fine. Kip, on the other hand, does sort of come to, and between Kip and Yvette, we start describing this situation. But of note, there is no Aunt Lucia here, and there is no Franco here. What we hear is that there was some sort of a conflict in the early morning, and Lucia was sniffing around at everyone, and specifically sniffing around at Franco. Yvette says she started talking about how she wanted to have children of her own, and then she took Franco and bolted for the door. And on her way, she started getting uglier and bigger. Kip tried to stop her, Diego tried to stop her, Diego got thrown against the wall, and she ran through the closed door, through the wall, taking the whole front end of the place and blasting Kip across the yard. Outside, in the direction of the barn, where she had gone, what the PCs discover is Aunt Lucia's head. So now we know where the bread metal's been this entire time, but we don't know where it is. The PCs are sort of able to triangulate a little bit, and their best guess, unsurprisingly, is that it is heading back into the softwood, probably along the river, probably toward the Warrens. So now they have a destination. They run to the nearest farm, tell them to fetch a healer for Diego. The nearest farm, by the way, because I needed a quick Roman surname, is called the Tedious Farm. I think that's lovely. So now we have the Tedious family. They run off to fetch a healer, and the PCs continue on into the softwood, where they are able to scramble through the bars that the Raiden Whites had told them about last time. Along the way, they also noticed that the wall here is chipped and a little bit crumbly at the top, as if something very big just vaulted it fairly recently. All the rubble is on the inside of the wall. Once on the other side, they are in a forest unlike any they have ever been in. For starters, the ground is soft and squishy everywhere. There are huge mushrooms growing up where there might otherwise be trees. There's also some deciduous trees. Are they deciduous? Which ones are the ones with the needles? Coniferous is what I meant. I'm a terrible druid. Anyway, there are these evergreen trees that are cropping up here and there, but it's largely squishy and mushrooms. There's brambles everywhere. There's the occasional quicksand, which my players were so relieved to hear, because many of them grew up in the 80s like me, and they were led to believe that quicksand was going to be a very important part of their life. So the first thing we have is a montage test. For those of you not familiar with montage tests, that's the lesson for the week. Let's talk about how montage tests work. So this isn't actually very hard, right? The whole point of a montage test is just that people make skill checks, and what you want is to succeed more than you fail. There are fiddly details, and here's how they work. A regular montage, and we're assuming 5 players here, a regular montage takes 2 rounds. Each round, everybody gets to roll. They can use that roll to make a skill check, or if they want, they can use that roll to aid another player. That's fine too. The fear with that, though, you need to get about as many successes as you have players on this thing. So if you are using your roll to aid another character, they are very likely to succeed, but that's still only going to net you 1 success between the 2 of you. So it's probably only worth doing if you're really bad at everything, which is very hard to do in Draw Steel. It would be very weird for you to have a Draw Steel character who didn't have the ability to contribute to this stuff. That's the point of the design. A regular, normal, run-of-the-mill, low difficulty montage test just means you get your number of successes, whatever that is, inside those 2 rounds before you hit a maximum number of failures. So, just for example, you and your friends are tracking some dudes through the wilderness. There are 5 of you, so over the course of 2 rounds at a low difficulty montage, you need to score 5 successes before you accrue 5 failures. That is a total success on the montage test. It means you are completely victorious. A failure would be if you accrue 5 failures before you get 5 successes, or in this case you would get, 3 or less successes. You get 5 failures, you have failed at the montage test. There is an option for a mixed victory, right? This is a success but not a complete success. That would mean, let's say you get, in this case, 3 or 4 successes, and you do not amass more failures than successes. So let's say you get 4 successes, 2 failures, but your 2 rounds are up. You don't have any more rounds left in the montage test. You didn't get enough successes to completely succeed at the thing, but you did better than not. In that case, you get a partial success, and usually that means you get some of what you want. I have fewer than 5 players, All that means is all of my numbers go down by 1. But I didn't want this to be an easy montage. I wanted it to be a moderate difficulty because this is a new place for them. Wandering through these woods should not be easy. Well, all that means is that you just shift a difficulty, right? You shift from failure to success 1 across the board, and then everything becomes easy. So in my case, if my players got 5 successes before they got 3 failures, that makes it a total success. If my players had gotten, say, 4 successes and 2 failures, but the time expires, that would have been a partial success. And if they got less than 4 successes and the 3 requisite failures to fail the montage, then they just fail the thing entirely. Well, in this case, what they were really doing in this montage test was making their way through the softwood. And they had to overcome things like brambles, like quicksand, like getting lost, the fact that it's constantly wet, the fact that there's gross mushroom spores everywhere. There's also giant mosquitoes and predatory fish, both of which fly. The fish don't fly, they swim through the air. The air here is kind of a thick, soupy, it's a little gross. It's like 90% air, 10% water, but it's enough water for the fish to swim through and enough air for you to breathe. It's magic. Don't think too hard about it. But the real purpose of this montage was to set them up for an encounter going through the softwood. Because what I knew and what they didn't know is that at the end of their montage test, which they succeeded, by the way, I've actually never run a game where the players didn't succeed at a montage. I know it's possible. It's just never happened to me. So I need to run more of these and see what a failed montage feels like. At the end of the montage, they see the Warrens in the distance. There's like a waterfall on the top of a rocky outcropping. There's caves. That's the destination. But between us and them, there's a bunch of brambles. There's some quicksand, which my players clock because they succeeded on the montage test. But also what's in there are basilisks. Specifically, a mated pair of basilisks who had drug 3 Raiden whites into their area to feed their clutch of eggs. One of the Raiden whites had been turned to stone. One of the Raiden whites was being turned to stone while they watched, and the other one was just unconscious nearby. Sidebar, this is called Specs. It's like a squishy, it's a fidget, right? But it's like a soft, squishy, you should get one. You'd love it. I love it. It's not sponsored. I don't have sponsors because why would I do that? Nobody's paying me for this nonsense. My players succeed on the montage test, so they win initiative, they see the basilisks, they clock the quicksand, we're on. It is time to draw steel. When you draw a sword in real life, it doesn't make a noise. It kind of does. It makes a shushy sound, but it doesn't make that swing, and I just want everybody to know that. I think it's important. But the swing noise is fun. It's fun. We should do it. Right? But we should do it in like movies and stuff and in games, but like let's not pretend it's realistic. It's not realistic. It's just, maybe one of these days I'll just go off on a tear about swords. People like that, right? People like swords. And when other people are super nerdy and tell them how unrealistic their fun fantasy games are, it's like super popular. I lay out the map. I position the camera because the player of Titus is actually at home. He's kind of feeling under the weather, but he still wanted to participate. So we've got like the map there. We've got Titus here. I took a picture of the map, and my wife took a picture of the map, and we stuck it in the thing so that he could participate from afar. And we're off to the races. There are a lot of cool things that happened during this Basilisk fight. I'm just going to highlight 1 or 2 of them. The PCs, as you can see, are using the brambles for cover because they know that basilisks will zappy them if they have the option, and they do not want to turn to stone if it can be helped. So Vanish moves in using these big, see these orange things are on here are mushrooms, using the mushrooms as cover and using the victories he accrued earlier plus the insight from this round of combat. He kicks off with the setup. The setup is great. The setup means that you target an enemy, it takes a little bit of damage, but then it has damage weakness until it saves. And in this case, it gives this thing a damage weakness of 5. meaning all these attacks are doing an extra 5 damage, which is tremendous. I'm going to come back to why that's tremendous later, but there is a reason it's tremendous later that is even better than the reason it's tremendous now. Anyway, the PCs start unloading on the Lady Basilisk, the bigger of the two Bascali, the larger of the two Basiliuses, and she still can't see them. Vanish still has cover. The PCs are around the brambles. She's a little bit lost, right? She's surprised. She doesn't know what's going on. So she starts making her way over this way, tearing into the mushrooms. Eventually, she does see what's going on. And she starts laying into the PCs here. The male joins her on his action. And again, it is a full-on melee. One of the first things that happens here is that the PCs helpfully line up for me. And if you have used a Basilisk in Draw Steel, what you know is that their petrifying attack is like a line, it's a gaze. But if you were to say spend 7 malice, which I did, one thing that you can do is the Basilisk can create a reflective shield in areas in like a something like a 3x10 square or something. It's huge. It's a pretty big area where the Basilisk creates reflective spittle, and they create like a mirror-like surface on something, and then they can use that to reflect their own petrifying gaze, and when they do, it is even bigger. It's like 10 by 3 or 20 by 3. It's huge. Well, the PCs had conveniently lined up for me, so I hit them with that double whammy, and all of a sudden, both Corinne and Vanish are turning to stone. The way you stop yourself turning to stone and Draw Steel is cool. Let's take a look at the Basilisk and find out how that happens, because this is a really good one. So when a Basilisk hits you with their petrifying eye beams, essentially you are restrained. Save ends. What that means is, if you are restrained, you begin to turn to stone. And if you end 2 consecutive turns restrained in that way, you are now petrified. But also, if you are restrained in that way, you or a creature adjacent to you can use their main action to cut the encroaching stone from your body, dealing 8 damage to the target that can't be reduced in any way. That was awesome. Now, both Vanish and Corinne did eventually save from this effect, but Corinne just barely saved from this effect, by which I mean she had to spend a hero token to do it. So what we decided, since Corinne is a chronopath, what she did is she basically pulled an earlier version of herself that was not petrified into this chunk of timeline and put her into the stone instead. So she just sort of traded places with this non-petrified version of herself, and that's how she got out of the stone. Awesome. Vanish saved normally, but it was a very narrow thing. And I got to tell you, they were pretty low on stamina. It was rough. Titus and Marta, basically being the warriors that they are, just went through the brambles to get at these things. The female ended up basically sideways in the quicksand, sort of not being drugged down, like one of her wings caught her, but she was submerged in the quicksand and went down that way. The male is a really interesting story here, because at one point in time, the male attacks Marta, and the male at this point has been set up for a second time, and it is taking 5 extra damage every time it takes damage. Okay, fine. So it hits Marta, who is a null. It attacks Marta. Oh, I cannot stress enough, this is how Draw Steel works. This all happened on my turn. It attacks Marta. Marta uses her triggered action to take half damage, and then knocks it back. And knocks it back like an absurd amount, like 5 squares. So she's like, okay, through the brambles. Well, when you travel through the brambles, every square of movement does 1 damage. So now every square of movement is doing 6 damage to the Basilisk. That is the end of this Basilisk. That was 30 damage on a knockback on his turn. Goodbye, Basilisk. So the fight is over. The PCs are victorious. We have a couple of Raiden Whites on the ground who are in need of assistance, and this is when we find out another thing about Corinne. She is skilled in alchemy. She knows that because she knows that you can use the oil sacs from the inside of the mouth of a basilisk to make a healing tincture that will revive someone from petrification. She's only got enough of the stuff to make one potion. So the PCs use their healing skills to wake up the red and white that is not petrified. Her name is Adelaide. And Adelaide tells them that she is super grateful. She confirms that this thing above is indeed their warrens, that they have indeed been kicked out of it because everybody was losing their heads. The three of them had come back this way because they were trying to find some supplies. Their people had been kicked out. They were trying to get back in, get some of their supplies, sneak out. Didn't go that way. The basilisks found them. The basilisks moved in their absence. The PCs say, well, we can only wake up one of your friends. Who's going to be the most helpful? She points at the one with the sticky sword over there in the gray and says, well, Dorian knows the warrens best, so if you need help getting in, he's the one. We can work on the other one later. And they wake up Dorian. He is super grateful for their assistance, takes a few minutes to throw up, and then tells them that he is willing to lead them into the warrens. So now the PCs have acquired for themselves enough, a bunch of basilisk stuff, like basilisk eyes and some more of those glands to make the depetrifying solutions, though that's going to require a respite action. More on that later. And more importantly, they have a red and white minion who shall lead them into the warrens, which we will talk about next time. So today, we stumbled upon the injured Chapata family, followed the bread battle into the softwood, did battle with some basilisks, learned how montage tests work, saved some Raiden Whites, and prepared ourselves to move into the warrens. Come back next time for more studies in Effluence. If you liked this at all, there's going to be links in the doobly-doo to Draw Steel by MCDM, which you can play. They have a new Kickstarter coming out, so if you're thinking to yourself, man, this sounds cool, but I'm not super interested in creating an epic adventure, that's okay. They're going to have an epic adventure. It's going to be called Crack the Sun. All by itself, that should sell you on it. But if that doesn't sell you on it, you get to go to the sun in a fantasy spaceship and do battle with the terrible thing that lives inside it. Come on, man. Very soon, probably two of these from now, maybe three, we are going to have almost an entire video dedicated to respite actions. And one of the things you can do in a respite action in this game is crafting. It's got a whole crafting system. And if that sounds cool to you, it's because it is. But if you are thinking to yourself, man, that sounds cool, but also I need a little help, there's going to be a link in the doobly-doo to the Kickstarter by the Dice Society. They're putting out a whole book to help you with the crafting system. And one of the primary things it does is it gives you little plot seeds, right? If you want to make this item, here's how your PCs can go about finding the material components necessary to make those items. Good stuff. It's going to be awesome. If you thought this story sounded in the least bit interesting and you're interested in more cool stories set in this world, I write fantasy novels in my spare time, and I have an entire book set in this world. You can go to crownsforgotten.com. There's a link in the doobly-doo to my website stuff. I put one chapter of the book up a month. You can just read it for free online, or if you want, you can buy the thing. There are links to do that as well. There is another one coming out pretty soon, a sequel to the first book, and fair warning, it is much, much, much longer. But better. Catch you all next time. Play games, draw steel, studies not. Or something like that.